And for her then to get in front of Congress and say, wow, I was just defending free speech. She discovered free speech on October 7th, when people started attacking Jews and attacking Israel. Suddenly she became a champion of free speech. It's the hypocrisy, it's the double standard, it's the attitude on college campuses today, which says that Jewish students are not entitled to feel safe, but students who are members of other minorities are entitled to feel safe.
I'm not sure how many people in this country are actually following what's been going on in US universities and anti-Semitism and what happened over the last week or so. But I suppose the question is, when we look to where Harvard's reaction to it is, should this have led to Claudine Gay, the president, losing her job? She hasn't lost her job. The university has defended her. Do you think she should have lost her job?
Absolutely. She should have lost her job, not for, in some ways, defending the free speech of bigots who called for genocide against Jews, but for not defending the free speech for years and years of people who offended blacks, gays, transgender people. She has a clear double standard. She did not tell the truth to Congress when she said that Harvard for years has had a policy of expanding and accepting freedom of expression. They haven't. They have refused to accept lectures that were politically incorrect. They have disciplined students. They have withdrawn admissions from people for saying something in high school. They have had an abysmal record on free speech, which landed them last on a ranking of American universities for free speech. And for her then to get in front of Congress and say, wow, I was just defending free speech. She discovered free speech on October 7th, when people started attacking Jews and attacking Israel. Suddenly she became a champion of free speech. It's the hypocrisy, it's the double standard, it's the attitude on college campuses today, which says that Jewish students are not entitled to feel safe, but students who are members of other minorities are entitled to feel safe. She was one of the promoters of what has come to be called Safeism. Safeism. That is, making students feel safe is more important than allowing them to express their views.
So do you think Jews are treated differently in American universities like Harvard?
Well, I think Zionists certainly are, people who support Israel. And there's a presumption if you're a Jew, if you're wearing a kippah or Star of David, you must support all of Netanyahu's policies on everything. I would say the vast majority of Jews at Harvard don't support Israeli policies necessarily, but they support the right of one nation state to become a nation state for the Jewish people. And people who identify with that definitely are treated far worse than, for example, Black extremists who support extreme Black views or extreme gay views or extreme transgender views. There is clearly a double standard.
Some people have said, Alan, though, that the people calling for her head are themselves part of the culture war. This is a load of Republicans have rode in on this. And yet again, we're seeing the culture war being played out. This isn't necessarily so much about the rights and wrongs. It's about which side you want to pick in a culture war. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that the Harvard Corporation is right in ignoring politicians who are pandering, but they also ignored very distinguished alumni, people who really feel very important part of the school. They've also ignored many members of the faculty, like me and Professor Steven Pinker, and many, many students. So even putting aside the Republican culture war, they should at least have a discussion of the merits. The corporation statement didn't deal with any of the real criticisms of Professor Gay, President Gay, except for the allegation of plagiarism, which I don't believe is a particularly strong one. But the allegations of the double standard, they didn't deal with. And so they're obligated to deal with the merits of the complaints, even if they ignore the sources, some of the sources of the culture wars.
Do you think if someone had asked her in Congress, what would you say to someone calling for genocide against Palestinians? She'd have said straight away, that's appalling. There's no place on that. It breaks all our regulations. There's no free speech issue here at all.
I would hope so. I would hope I would say the same thing. And
but she wouldn't say. But she wouldn't say that straight away about genocide against Jews. So
no,
do you think
no.
she would have said something? Do you think she would have said something different if the target had been different? I guess my point.
what I think she should have said here, I'll read you the statement that I would have written for her if she had asked my advice. Under the standards that Harvard has applied in the past, there is no doubt that calling for the genocide against Jews is a clear violation of Harvard's rules. You know, if committing a microaggression, if saying the way the former president of Harvard said that maybe men and women have a different capacity in mathematics and physics, that got him fired. That's been the standard. Under Harvard's standard, of course, calling for the genocide of Jews or any other group would be a violation of the rules. But she didn't have the courage to say that because she didn't want to admit that Harvard has had a terrible standard on free speech. Instead, she mendaciously told Congress, quote, "We embrace a commitment to free expression." No, you don't. And no, you have never done that.
Do you think the academic world, generally universities in the US, have a problem with anti-Semitism, that ultimately they see Jews not as a minority that can be compared to other minorities like black people or gay people or trans people? They see Jews as a distinct, different minority, a minority in power, a minority in Israel that is aggressive, and therefore ultimately they don't have the same set of standards when it comes to the treatment of them as minorities.
They've acknowledged that through the diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracy. DEA explicitly excludes Jews. It also excludes Cubans and Asians. It picks and chooses which minorities are favorable and which are not, because it's part of the intersectionality program that says the world is divided into oppressors and oppressed. And Jews are the oppressors, and Palestinians are the oppressed, and gays are the oppressed, and transgenders are the oppressed. So they apply a completely different standard under intersectionality and under the DEI. And anti-Semitism has been fostered by the DEI bureaucracy, and it wouldn't change even with the firing of President Gay, as it hasn't changed at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, under the firing of President McGill. What's needed is a complete reconsideration of how groups are pitted against each other at universities because of identity politics. Today, students aren't treated as students, they're treated as Black students or Jewish students or gay students or women students. That's been the problem. And when you pit minorities against each other, inevitably the result is going to be bigotry against some.
This might be a difficult question, but I probably should ask it. The President McGill lost her job. President Gay has not lost her job. She's a black woman in a job where there aren't many black women. Do you think that ultimately, because she's a black woman, that's helped her keep her job? Is that a degree of positive discrimination at work there, do you feel?
Well, I think probably it played a role. After all, President McGill had a much stronger case for what she said. She has a long actual history of supporting freedom of speech. She's a professor of law who specialized in freedom of speech, whereas President Gay has had a long, sordid history of denying freedom of speech. So the case for getting rid of Gay was much stronger than the case for getting rid of McGill. And I think the fact that A, the board who selected her was the board who supported her, and B, obviously, the idea of selecting an African-American woman as the first president of Harvard to have that status has to have played a role. It certainly played a role among some of the alumni who supported keeping her on. So I think, yes, I think race did play a role.
And just finally, before you go, Alan, the political position around Israel must play a part in all of this. I wonder how you judge that. We talk quite often on our program. We have the IDF on very regularly. We have Netanyahu's people on very regularly. And the point we put to them is, at some point, are their actions going to make it harder and harder for moderate people to defend Israel? This is less about Jewish students. It's just about the political climate we're in. How do you judge that, Alan? I mean, at some point, Biden's position might change. America's position collectively, if you can judge it, might change. That Israel's way of pursuing a legitimate war in an illegitimate fashion to some people might change the global opinion of them. Do you sense a shift at all in how Israel's right to defend itself, which many would recognize, might be a harder argument with how the state is behaving?
I don't recognize a shift because I think this has been true since basically 1967. There has been a double standard applied to Israel's use of self-defense, but I agree with you completely that Israel's actions in Gaza contribute, but don't initiate it. Remember that much of the criticism of Israel started on October 8th. The National Lawyers Guild, 33 groups at Harvard, before Israel ever fired a shot, they were condemned for the rapes and the beheadings in Israel. And this was merely a continuation of it. I agree with you that Israel has a very tough decision to make. It wants to wipe out Hamas. Hamas knows that and hides its fighters and its rockets and its tunnels amid civilians, hoping that civilians will die and that the world will look very negatively on Israel. They call it the CNN strategy. Others call it the dead baby strategy. And Hamas is going to do it again and again because it works. Kill as many Jews as possible, provoke Israel to try to respond, hide your fighters among civilians, know that civilians will die, and know that the world will condemn Israel. Israel has a very, very tough decision to make as to how to proceed. And I hope it does it in a way that minimizes civilian casualties.
Well, Alan, it's an area that we talk about all the time, and it's not going anywhere soon, I don't think. It's a real pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much for having me.